just go ahead and open up the Zoom here for anybody joining us online and officially say, hi everybody, welcome into Fourspace. Bonjour et bienvenue tout le monde. We're so glad that you could join us in person or online for an open discussion on Romani language and translation practices, which is happening within the scope of the Romani-Translation Summer Institute here at Concordia University. And more specifically, today you're joining us from Fourth Space, which I'll tell you about in just a second, but I'll also let you know that we are streaming this event live to YouTube from Fourth Space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands here in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Nous reconnaissons la nation Kanien'kehá:ka comme gardienne des terres et des eaux sur lesquelles nous nous réunissons aujourd'hui. And we make this acknowledgement to bring awareness and understanding of the history of Indigenous peoples and their territories that we occupy. So if you're new to Fourspace and Concordia University more generally, let me just tell you what we do here. We are a public space. We work with our community of Concordia University profs, students and staff in order to connect people to the ongoing, namely research projects and other major initiatives happening across the university through activities that really invite conversation and sometimes even hands-on participation. So really with the goal of mobilizing and sharing knowledge. And so this kind of open discussion is really up our alley in terms of how we engage with folks around the various questions, discussions, and research topics that are being mobilized here. This week, it's our pleasure to work with Debbie Folarin and all of those who were instrumental in bringing this institute to life here at the university. And so I'll just, before passing it to our panelists, mention that since we have a kind of hybrid setup and there's a Zoom component to this, if you have a question for our panelists and you're here in the audience with us, just let us know you'd like to speak by raising a hand and we'll get this microphone to you so that the people online can hear you. Otherwise, the panelists have their microphones ready to go, and I'll pass the floor to them now. Welcome all.
Thank you very much, and welcome again to this new session where we are going to discuss the issues from this morning sessions together with Dr. Hedina Tahirović-Siercic and together with Mr. Orhan Galush. We are going to discuss some of the issues of Romani language and culture, and we will answer all kinds of questions connected to Romani language and culture. So maybe just to summarize what we were speaking today, in order the audience to be informed about the discussions and presentations this morning. We were speaking about the history of Romani language and how Romani language was created outside of India, and which languages played an important role in the formation of the language. And also we were discussing the connection between the culture and the language, and how the different communities around the world, although are speakers of different dialects, they have the same cultural background and the same cultural heritage. After that, our colleague, Dr. Hedina Tahirović-Siercic was speaking about the translation and the necessity of teaching materials and educational process in order to prepare translators in the school system. And our colleague, Orhan Galush, who is a journalist, was mainly speaking about the use of Romani language in media and particularly in radio. So more or less, these were the discussions since this morning, and there were a lot of questions and comments. And now we are happy to continue the discussion here and to answer your questions. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm unfortunately I wasn't at the last session, but when you mention education, when you mention training, I'd like to hear from all three of you, because I know that you're experienced already in having translated and interpreted. There's always a big discussion that goes on in the professional translator community about, well, we can't really teach translators, right? You just have to learn it by doing it. And then others who say, no, it's not possible. We can also create a program, a training module that will help translators become translators, or help those who are interested in being translators become translators. So I'd be interested, based on your life experience, in fact, what do you think, if you were to design a kind of program to train a Romani translator, and by this I mean, I don't assume here that you would assume that they would go from Romani language to all of the major languages, but let's say going into the Romani language or Romani dialect. How would you design a kind of training, not necessarily a whole program, but just a training? And do you think, the second part of this question is, do you think it would be beneficial? Or is it something that really can't be taught? And what would you teach? And that's the end of my question.
In part of my lecture, actually, I talk about translation as a tool for teaching and learning Romani language. Actually, I didn't give any proposal or methodology how to do that, because we don't have enough teaching and learning Romani in educational systems, so we could investigate this question or this matter. But the problem is that we should think about that. We should think about approaches, about methodologies, about theories in Romani context. Actually, we had a workshop in 2021, and I submitted through my lecture definition of Romani translator, and also skills which could be or must be accepted or must have a translator, good quality translator, to get into process of translation. And how to organize training was your first question. Actually, we have to sit down and to write syllabus, kind of syllabus. We did that once, Debbie, you remember, syllabus for translation in Romani context for model at the university studies, at the university. And maybe we can get back to this syllabus and think about what to give or what knowledge to provide to the future translators, you know, and would be beneficial or not to the translator, this training. Of course, it would be beneficial, because it is not enough to work translation, to do translation just according to the experience. It is really very important to know both languages, source and target language, but with all expressions, special expressions, homonyms, synonyms, loan words, neologisms in the language, and knowing culture, both cultures, target and source culture as well. Then I think it is also necessary, I know that we don't have approaches in Romani context, but to know and to learn the approaches that are already given in translation studies as the strategies for translation, like a word-for-word translation strategy. What does it mean, word-for-word? How functions this strategy? Then the sense-for-sense strategy. Why sense-for-sense? What does it mean? And how to approach what looks like this translation. Then I invented, as I told you, raw sense-for-sense translation in Romani context, because I think that this strategy actually helps a lot to follow up the both languages and at the same time learn the languages and also analyze them. You know, this is very important, not just to learn one language, but both languages. As exemplary Ofelia Garcia said, this is not about bilingualism, it is about dualism, because in Romani case, you can talk about dualism because of contact languages. This is a contact language which is deep in each Romani speaker, and where Romani speaker actually domesticate the words, lexemes from the contact language into Romani. I show the participants few examples how contact languages flow into the Romani language and how it looks like the translation. I think it is very important to know and would be beneficial, of course. It would be very useful for any translator.
Okay, so the possibility of training somebody to be a translator is there, and the idea of designing something could really be useful, could be helpful. What do you, I'd like to hear what either one of you, yeah, go ahead.
Well, it happened in my life that I'm interpreter from Romani to other languages, and there is a very big experience of a number of Romani people who are interpreters, those who know very good number of Romani dialects, and as well those who have experienced in translation. Council of Europe, European Commission, European Parliament, and other bodies in Europe, they are used now to invite a number of us and translate during the conferences, meetings, and whatsoever.
Do they train you?
No, we did not had a formal training. What we have done, looking to the need from those institutions, we have taken a way of self-training.
Okay.
So, and sometime was a training from an association, or I might mention here that Marcel Cortiade has been organizing kind of a training of some of 10, 15 people who went to a special training how to translate and so on. But this initiative that you have organized, I'm saying really organized, so it is important. I believe that your university has been recognizing the need, and thanks to that you have a system how to educate the interpreters, translators. I believe that you would and you will find yourself, I mean, university, in a position to educate future interpreters, professionals, highly professionals. One very small experience that I have had, first time or those first months or a year when I started to make translation, simultaneous translation, I had the fear entering in the booth and looking to the professionals. But then I saw how important is translation to the Romani participants at the conference or event, how they would understand the matter, that we are the one who will make a dialogue, who will make a bridge, that Romani language will be a language to make very good mutual understanding when one speaks.
And if I could just add to what he's saying, for those of you who aren't in translation studies or interpreting studies. The distinction is translation, we write it. So when you start with a written text or written content, and then your translation is going to consist in a written, it will be in a written form. Interpreting is oral. So many times you'll hear oral translation, but interpreting will always understand to be an oral version of translating, right? And that's a distinction to make. And the other term that you're going to hear if you're not in translation studies and don't know is a term that Hedina used, and it's source and target. So when we speak of conceptualizing and understanding, considering different theories of how we translate, we've used these terms as source language, source culture, target language, target culture. And if you think about it, it's very binary and very reductive, because it assumes that everybody can be classified and categorized as one source language and one source culture, which of course on the ground is never the case, right? And so what is very interesting in the Romani context, in fact, is that doesn't fit, as we know, right? There's not one Romani language, there's not one Romani culture, one that you can take as if there was an old communications model and say, input, output. You have to consider all the diversity, you have to consider all the heterogeneity. And so this is hence my question about how do you train like that? Because our training systems, our manuals, our handbooks, our everything that we have tend to focus on these kind of standardized, for example, a national language that has in some way been standardized through a literary canon, dictionaries, grammars, everything. So how do we think about translation in a context where this isn't yet the case, but which requires a good deal of cognitive maneuvering, in fact, in order to achieve communication, which is the end goal of translation and interpreting?
Well, maybe I should try to answer this question. In order to be a good translator or interpreter, you have to be good speaker of Romani language. For the time being in Europe, the educational systems actually do not offer possibility children to learn Romani from kindergarten until gymnasium and university. So all the Roma interpreters and translators actually are using their home variety of Romani, and based on their knowledge, level of knowledge of that home variety, they try to make translation or interpretation using their knowledge. So I would even think about this, that when you are speaking, you are having in mind most probably and obviously translation studies in the university, at university level. I would think a little bit further that Roma translators, Roma interpreters could be trained and prepared in school as well, in secondary school, when the children are after the basic school, they go to type of gymnasium level, some kind of schools in Europe. There are different types of schools, but this is the secondary school, or in some cases are called gymnasiums, or yeah. So those schools could offer to Roma children training in Romani with the goal how to use Romani as a language to translate from any other language to Romani, or from Romani to any other language. So, but for that, we have to have a package of basic knowledge of Romani, how and what they should know from Romani grammar. And of course, together with the knowledge of Romani grammar, they should learn also different strategies used for the process of translation or interpretation. I'm writing very often children's books, and they are in both languages. When I say both languages, I have books which are published in Romani English, Romani German, Romani Turkish, Romani Arabic, Romani Bulgarian. Do I miss any language? I don't remember. So when I do this kind of translations, actually I write the text alone and in English, for example, and then or in Romani, and then I will do these translations to the other languages which I know. And but how I do that, it's in most of the cases I use my intuition.
Okay.
So being a speaker of several languages, I never got the training about this. How should I do translation? Because when I translate from Romani into Bulgarian is something, and totally different thing is when I translate from Romani to Turkish or to German, because of the different cultural characteristics. And there are things which I cannot express in the target language, in this case, German or Bulgarian, and I have to find a way how to describe this, what I want to translate. But of course, no one taught me. I never got any training about this, how to make translation. And in most of the cases, I was using my intuition when I was younger, and nowadays when I'm a little bit more experienced, I continue to use my intuition how to do that.
And do you think that would be of interest to young people who are going to be learning how to translate? Would that be useful, the wisdom you've gathered from your experience of translating?
No, I think that should be trained. That should be organized, that should be systematized, and just to rely on your intuition. Yeah, if I'm having a good intuition today, maybe tomorrow I will not be in the mood to have a good intuition, and this is not the professional way of doing the work. Yeah, and the most important thing is to have a system which is clear. With clear subjects, what the students will learn, and what kind of theoretical background they will get, what kind of practical exercises they should have. And of course, they have to have also possibility to practice that, being in an international conference, in a publishing house, or in a radio program where the two languages are used, and etc. I think everything should be well designed, organized, taught, and presented to the students. And instead of waiting the students to come to the university and then to start with all these trainings, I think that there could be also programs in secondary school, high school, gymnasiums, where the students can take as training courses, this kind of preparatory courses for to get basic knowledge how to do the translation and interpreting. And then when they are in the university, if they would like to continue to the university, then they can go deeper and develop their knowledge.
In my view, because I already settled up the skills for Romani translator or translators is to know the purpose of translation, which is very, very important, because we are often thinking about translators who are doing translation for some clients that don't have really good approach to Romani people or to our nation. And it is not important just that you get money for this translation, it is very important to read the text before you say, yes, I'm going to do that. Because pre-reading of the text can determine your strategy, your will, your emotions to approach translation. And after that, it is coming on to the money that you are asking for and deadline, of course. But in process of translation, you also have to think about the languages, about the knowledge of source and target language, of cultures, of special expressions. You have to think about the loan words in the language, about the neologisms, about all, I say, Romisms, because we are creating Romisms, adding on loan words and neologisms, our Romani suffixes at the end of the lexeme. And this is very important also. Then we have to think about revision of translation. I'm not so much involved in interpreting because this is another strategy.
And another set of skills.
Methodology. But in translation, you have always to think about revision. Who is going to revise your translation? Because this is, with revision, your translation is the finished product. You know, because translation is process, and your translation, when revised, is the product of translation. And then, in the meantime, while translating in the process, if you are not aware or don't know about some lexemes, you have to choose consultant who is going to give you proposals or own knowledge about certain expressions, about lexemes, etc. This is very important. I think about that. Should learn the future translators, and there is nobody who is going to make them aware about that.
Right. For those of us who are in translation studies, either teaching or as a student, it helps to have a strategy when you first, and I think that you can all attest, all the students in the back, to have a strategy to start with, right? Like how to attack it. Just by being bilingual makes it a bit more difficult. I'm wondering if I could ask a few questions to the audience here. I'm curious, for those of you who are working in the Romani language in whatever dialect, what is the challenge that you have found most significant to date? And that's the first. The second, how could that be remedied by a translator training program, if there was one that existed? What would be helpful to you? Any ideas? Yep. Is it kind of related to that?
Barako Tuminge and Butparkla. My name is Hannah, and I am a student working with Pagardi Chibs, or mixed Romani languages, particularly in the north, as well as northern indigenous languages. So I had a couple of questions based on what you guys were speaking about, and they are sort of related to experiences I've had working with other minority and small languages that are trying to establish translation seminars practices, and how that might work in a Romani, Romanes, Pagardi, Rotipa context. The first is this spring, I attended and got my certification in Sami language, interpretation and translation, which is a minority language spoken in northern Fennoscandia. And the way that we had this training program is that we got into the room and everyone had there was an opening seminar that was given in, as you said, a bulk language. And then we separated, which is people who speak North Sami, you go over there and you're gonna, just focus on North Sami. People who speak South Sami, you come over here, we're gonna just focus on this. People who speak Skolt Sami, people who speak Ulev, and everyone was separated until there were 5 different groups in the room. If this was a Romani language seminar, would you do the same with Romani language variants? Would it be wise to separate it or keep everyone together? My second question had to do with translation and using loan words versus making a word. So I think 2 great examples is the first is in Finland, Sweden, and Norway. The news is translated into Sami, but the issue is the way that the language policies work up there is that you need to have it in Sami. You cannot have it half Sami, half Swedish, half Sami, half Norwegian, half Sami, half Finnish, etc. So people will either make up words or look into dictionaries and craft words based on sort of current topics that are happening. Like there's no word in Sami for cell phone, so they made up the word hand telephone. And then when a native Sami speaker reads the news, they can't understand it because there are so many words that are made up that are not things that they're using where they would take a loan word, a word has been made up. So while it was sort of a good idea to have the news available in practice, one of my friends who's a native Sami speaker told me I can't get more than a paragraph through the news because there are so many words that had to be looked up to talk about international politics. Mining, engineering, industry, things like that. Whereas I spent last summer in Nunavut doing field research on Inuktitut. And one thing that was said to me many times where mining happens a lot in Nunavut is companies would come up and instead of using the mining terms people already knew, they would try and create mining terms in Inuktitut. But then people couldn't understand them because they're so used to using the English terms. And they were like, why would you spend all this money to do this? When I came into Montreal through the customs at the airport, I saw that you could fill out the customs form in Inuktitut. So I did, and I was really excited. I was like, wow, this is so cool. I can, fill out the customs page in Inuktitut. But the issue is I couldn't understand anything because customs and international declarations are not based in any Inuit knowledge system. So there were all sorts of words and I was like, oh my gosh. And I sent it to a couple of my friends and they're like, I have no idea what these words are. And the third is Hedina. The document you were mentioning where you talked about what is a Romani language translator, I was wondering where you could find that because I'd be interested to read that. You said where you talked about a definition of Romani language translation. Yeah.
Okay, let's start with the answer to some of the questions. Maybe I can say something about Romani dialects and if we have to do a training for Roma speakers representing different groups and dialects. Should we divide them into north, south, east, west speakers of Romani? Actually, I have been doing this kind of trainings and usually what I do, I bring all the speakers together and if they don't understand something from one dialect, this is one possibility to learn new words, new phrases and to enrich their own dialect. I wouldn't do this separation by groups and by speakers, including Sinti. Sometimes I had training with Sinti, Arlie from Serbia, Chergari from Serbia, Arlie from Macedonia, and Sinti, and all of them were together. At the beginning, they were not very happy, especially the Sinti, but later they see that the language more or less is comprehensive. They understand what I'm teaching or speaking, in Romani, so they start to speak Romani as well. What was the other question? Would you like to add something?
In early 90s, European Commission has organized a program called Action on Romani Linguistics. Jean-Pierre Guergeois, who was well-known kind of a representative from European bodies, he collected number of Romani people who speaks some dialects, and then we had experts like Sanskritologists, expert on interpretation, translation, and we were sitting like a few hours how we can say for some parts of the body and the other surrounding that we are, they were trying to have a kind of a common language that when we translate that people could understand. What was important from that program was publishing the spot books, The Dogs Go to School, and so, and I think we spent hours thinking about how one can make it so beautiful, so good, so easy. And unfortunately, European Commission did not continue with such program as you've been involved. I would also remember that before to translate, we interpreters, we are having ideas and we have materials, what is about, and also for the writing, when you have to translate, but especially was that we have to prepare ourselves for simultaneous translation. That was the very difficult part. But thanks to experiences and learning actually from each other, the dialects that are existing, and we have come to a point to look like that the language we speak in the booths. Here is one of the most best interpreter, Vamosi Jusi, and when we are interpreting simultaneously, and at the moment there is no word, but then Jusi is taking microphone and say, Orhan, leave it, I'll do it. Because he knew, because the experience that he gains knowing the other dialects than I know, so these look like fulfilling each other. But all this experience, what we are looking for is that we could have a place with a systematic work to produce professional interpreters. And as well, first of all, those interpreters have to get to know Romani language and dialects. We don't see a problem. Dialects could born something very difficult. Because, for example, if I would speak my dialect from the street where I was born, and the language that I'm using usually in Europe or in the world is different. But that's why the ability of a person who wants to be educated, then we really have normally to be educated at the universities, having our professional work done, and then we can be a quality. I'm recalling that universities has to somehow get into official formal declarations or regulations on keeping heritage of the language. For example, in Europe is very important. That's why the Charter of the Languages is very positive on this issue, and the Commission follows very well this. So I imagine if a university would work together with the Commission and born a department for the interpreters with the Romani, in Romani languages, so that would be look like kind of, at this very moment, as much I can see the future, that would be a very good, because there is a very big need. for good interpreters. And this is also a way how we are getting to normalize the Romani language, getting into experiences that we have to make a language that everybody understands. Because when I am writing, I believe that a Rom who would read, not to be in this jungle as Hedina today show, an incredible syndrome of a mainstream languages that influence Romani, thinking that there is no a word for that. Romani language today has to be developed thanks to this work on interpreting, translation, to be a modern Romani language.
Yeah, and this process of developing the Romani language, it should not start at the university. In the university, it's already late. I think that the developing of Romani language should start in kindergarten, and as every single language is taught from kindergarten level, exactly the same should be with Romani. Why not? And this is the problem that in Europe, a lot of ministries of education think that teaching Romani will bring problems to the children to learn the official language. And then this puts the Romani language in the position of endangered languages. And it is already registered in the Red Book of UNESCO as an endangered language. And this process which we propose together with some colleagues and friends in the process of translation, interpreting, is to use Romani words from other dialects instead of, and this is to your question now, instead of taking a word from the official language and putting a suffix and making somehow this word looks like a Roma word, which doesn't help. And in most of the cases, the interpreters and the translators would do that from English as an international language. So they will take an English word and put a Romani suffix, and then they will think that this is a Roma word, instead of trying to think about existing Romani words in other dialects. But this brings then another question: how many dialects the interpreters and the translators speak? Romani dialects, yeah? And having this in mind, that means that the translators and interpreters who are going to be prepared such in the university, they have to learn also, there should be a subject, Romani dialectology, where different dialects should be learned in deep and with great details in order to enrich each other's dialect until that level when there will be already this common Romani where you will not say, oh, this is a word from another dialect. I know the meaning, but we don't use it in our dialect. And if you use it, then you will think that you are doing some kind of sin or some kind of criminality. So still for the time being, a lot of Roma have this kind of thinking, you know, and there is this neglect attitude, negative attitude towards the other dialect, different dialects. So if you are a speaker of Arlia, you would think that the Gurbeti dialect is, it's not so good. Or if you are a speaker of Kovachki dialect, you will think that the Chergarski dialect is not so good, etc. So still the Roma communities didn't come to that level of thinking and understanding that it doesn't matter what is called the dialect, this is the same language, Romani language. And even when you are a speaker of Sinti or Tatare and Finnish Romani, you are still speaker of Romani and not Romani languages, as usually some of the activist will put it. And yeah.
Actually, I'm thinking opposite than you, but in a way to think about schooling or learning Romani for in educational system. You said that it is important to start from kindergarten, but you have to ask yourself who is going to teach those children in kindergarten, because we are not going to be young, we are going to be older. And where is our new generation to teach those children? This generation, new generation, should be educated at a high level of education. It means that we have to produce educated teachers, professors, being able to teach our children from kindergarten to the rest of the school system. This is what I say. I have opposite thinking in that way. But according to the question from Hannah, I think I would also keep Romani speakers together. It doesn't matter which dialect they are talking, because I had experience teaching children in Canada, in Toronto, when I used to live in Toronto, then in Bosnia-Herzegovina, in Montenegro, in Croatia. And what is important? It is important to bring into syllabus, Romani language syllabus, knowledge about dialects, and to make aware each speaker that his dialect is valued, very well, and that each person in this group knows about differences and about common things. And also, I use all dictionaries that are produced in the region of ex-Yugoslavia. When I am translating, when there is no word in Gurbeti dialect, I am using from Arli or from other dialect that I find the word, and this is much better than use the words that I show you of Romisms, like to say, then to, why to choose some other words, loan words, when we have our words. This is how we can actually take care about vitality of our language. Because now it is going to disappear through this translation that I already show you upstairs. Then the other thing is, that we have to give to the next translators and teachers resources. We have to give them the list of the literature that is produced about the language, about culture, because as you see, they are really, how to say, faulenzer, das is German word, lazy. They are lazy to take dictionary and to use that while they are translating. They are just thinking to do that quick as possible, and it doesn't matter how it looks like. Who is going to read that? This is the next question. This is the next question. I'm always asking translator, when you're producing your product, translation, who is going to read that? Would this reader understand your translation if there is no source text? What is about that? And according to your question related just to me, I could give to Debbie all text in English and definitions that I invented actually through my work, and to submit to all of you through the net. This is the way. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is James Rossi. I'm a Romani interpreter myself. I actually started working as a Romani translator at the age of 10 back in 1989. And I've been doing conference interpretation since 1996, right? If I counted the conferences up to 570, and then I got very miserable because I realized that I've been spending more time at conferences than with my family, right? Maria is sat next to me, is my wife. I just want to give you guys an example. I really like the question with all the information you also interjected in that. And the Swami example, I love that as well. Actually, I had my very first international conference assignment in Helsinki, right? That's where I first came across Swami language myself. And I just remember a story now where Tarja Halonen was a minister of education, and the day was over, there was a reception, and she was talking, and I was very hungry. I've not eaten all day. That was my very first conference interpretation day. And while she was talking, I had a bite of a chicken right next to me. And she saw that disrespectful action from me, and she stopped and she said, I can see that our interpreter is very hungry. I guess everybody else got bored of my speech, so let's just eat. But the example I want to give you is that it happened there in Helsinki and afterwards in Strasbourg, Brussels, many, many times. That was the Macedonian translation in the booth, our colleagues, as well as the Bulgarian translation, right? And unfortunately, I don't speak Slavic languages, even though our ancestors come from Serbia. And it was always very interesting to me to learn languages. I'm always very fascinated about languages, right? So I'm just trying to learn Bulgarian and Macedonian, and I'm figuring like, man, this is kind of the same to me, right? They say, no way, man, this is very different. We speak Bulgarian, they speak Macedonian, they're very different. And then a point comes at a conference where everybody puts down their headphones and they just fight with each other without interpretation, right? And they completely understand each other, right? And one speaks Bulgarian. They're not Roma people, they're not gypsies, right? We're talking about white Bulgarians and white Macedonians, right? And then I realized, oh my God, of course, this is about politics, right? It's the nationalization process, standardization process, setting up our own institutions, fabricating something out of the language that many people speak in certain geographical area to an extent that manages to symbolize our pride as a nation, right? Now that is something that Romani speakers have never gone through, right? Institutions represented fear, always. They still do to date. That hasn't changed. Institutions carry on persecuting Romani speakers, right? And our only defense against that is our language. There's nothing else. And our eyes, right? Romani speakers actually communicate in the first place by their eyes, right? It's eye communications we do. I'm not too sure how many other cultures do that. Yeah? We ask questions with our eyes and we answer with our eyes, right? Now I'm thinking, and another thing you brought up in your question was, what do you do when there's a word that is not used by many Romani speakers or has been kept in one dialect, but most of the dialects have lost it, right? How do we respond to that? Now, what I've seen other colleagues do is, what we try to do when you become an experienced interpreter, and you look at the audience and the Romani speakers, you look at what caste, I call them castes because it helps us better understand the differences between each other and better describes our culture. So what caste belonging the speaker has, right? So if I really realize that there are 3 or 4 castes, yeah? And I'm not calling them dialects, yeah? Again, that's political. If we had dialects, we would have a country as well, right? But we don't have dialects, right? And we don't have a country. Instead, we have familacts, right? And familacts are really beautiful, I need to say as well. And I wouldn't want to change that. I would love to keep it as it is, right? All we need is really better understanding our familacts and better understanding each other, yeah? At conferences, what I saw was, so when I got started initially, and I heard the loan words, right? We all have loan words. And that was the only difficulty. But you spend an hour or 2, and you don't need more, really, right? You will figure out the differences, and you can communicate. So we've seen hundreds of conferences, right? With Orhan, we also translated lots of conferences together. And we've seen that happen in live action, right? People, Romani speakers, they're from 20 different countries, right? And they say, well, I don't understand him, but when it comes to arguing, there will be no problem with communication at all, right? Everybody will be able to talk to one another. What it comes down to is learning each other loan words, right? And the grammatical differences are minute, I would say. They aren't big. So, for example, the genitive, right? The archaic dialects would say oro at the end, right? Like lakoro, herds. And some dialects will say lako, lakoro. That's the difference, right? And I hear Orhan say lakoro. He hears me, I say lako. Oh, we won't bite each other. We will know that it's a difference, and we understand that that's the way he says his genitive, and that's the way I learned my genitive, right? But then the problem comes, right, where Romani speakers don't accept the other thing, and there is a reason for that as well. We don't accept the others because anything we see in the outside world on any platform is misinformation. Or another way to say it is a lie about us, right? And we know that. That's the exact same experience for all Romani speakers all over the world. So if you look at any platform, books, schools, institutions, teachers, they all get it wrong, right? But the other problem is that we are approaching this from the interpreter's perspective. Yes, I'm angry sometimes when I see somebody coming forward saying, hey, I speak Romani language, I'm a Roman interpreter, hire me. Yeah, as Hadina was saying, you're going for the money and not for the ethics and the professionalism. But look at the flip side of that coin. Who is recruiting these guys? Institutions. Council of Europe, European Union. Whose responsibility is it to recruit interpreters that are professional? Is it the interpreter that decides over his own recruitment? No, never. It's always the institution. And what do they do to make sure that the quality will be high? Nothing, right? If you look at most of the conferences, there is Romani language interpretation going on, but the Romani participants remain silent. They don't speak. And everybody thinks that these Roma people are dumb or not educated, or why is it that they are not engaging? And then sometimes they come to us in the breaks and they ask us, what was that word? What were you saying? Right? Or you don't understand my dialect, and they don't even dare to speak because the Romani they hear on the headphones is very different to their own. Right? But if you're an experienced interpreter, what you will do is, if, for example, there is the word computer, right? You use the phone. Let me use computer in my example. I was first in Strasbourg when I heard a Slovakian speaker get up and said, Pročitačis. And I was like, Pročitačis? What the heck is that, man? I've never heard that word before, right? And then a Hungarian speaker stands up and says, Számítógépo, which is a Hungarian word, right? But then I met a guy called Marcel Courtiat who was bringing up lots of neologisms, and he said, in his translation, elektrogógyi. And everybody understands that, you see? You see, this is when you make smart neologisms, right? Electric brain, right? That was his translation, electric brain, elektrogógyi, right? But then also I heard words from him which I thought was nonsense, man. I've never heard that word in my community, and I grew up with the Roma group. I understand Romani customary law very well, and that word I've never heard. And then 10 years later, I'm with a group of Roma people that have lived in a forest for 5 centuries in eastern Slovakia. They've never been allowed to the neighboring village, right? So when Hadina was saying earlier that we are all at least bilingual, no, you're wrong, unfortunately. I met many groups now, I can say many groups, where the isolation, the extent of isolation is something that I've never seen before anywhere else in any continent, right? And these people, if you think about it, I mean, when Christo earlier in the morning sessions was giving us examples and was saying how this is said in Hindi and how this is said in Romani, well, actually, there are Romani dialects that say it exactly the same way. Vogea. That's exactly how many people say that as well to date, right? So understanding the varieties of Romani, I would call it the varieties of Romani, is a huge journey to take, right? We've not embarked on that journey yet, really. And I'm thinking if we do a Romani translation course, if there is a Romani translation course, maybe growing out of the seed that is being planted by Concordia University, then that is a huge task to take on, to describe our varieties, the varieties of Romani. Really, I think it's very, very crucial, and it's really, really beautiful as well to understand how different, but also how identical we all are who speak any Romani variant.
Sure. I love your energy, by the way. Thank you so much. And what you said about isolation really just hit home for me in so many ways, because I'm mixed. So when my grandmother came to the US, and she had married outside of the culture, and so her Romani-Chal family was like, we don't want anything to do with this. Her Gajo husband was like, we don't want anything to do with you. So they left the United Kingdom and came to Pennsylvania. And part of this is, not necessarily language, but when you come to the United States, at least in my family's one experience, I don't want to generalize, there was the privilege of forgetting. They didn't have to be Romani in the United States. So my dad, who I love very much, never learned the language, moved to New York City, became a musician and never talked about it. It was gone. And I kind of was learning it on the edges through my interactions with her. But the issue is the home variant I learned was 100-year-old dialect of Pogardi spoken outside of Leeds that the only people who would speak it there would be 100-year-old people because it was isolated. Yeah, but it was to me, when I was talking to younger speakers, they were like, what the hell are you speaking? Because it was so isolated, and she, didn't have that community in the US. She just taught me what she learned. So, and I felt oh my God, I'm not real. I'm fake. I'm so embarrassed. And after that, I was just kind of I was so afraid to stay away because of that isolation. And, people who are connected and are part of language development, and someone like me who was learning I don't know, I guess a dead dialect or something, I felt so embarrassed. And even now, I'm so much more comfortable speaking to you in English because I'm nervous.
Sorry, I really need to respond to that. I'm not too sure if you guys were paying attention, but when she started giving us her question, she said something, right, which I'm not going to translate. I will just say what she said. She said, "Paruk tut." Yeah, have you guys heard this before? Paruk. Yeah. Okay. Now, in the UK, the Romani-Chals, right? Many say it's a Creole language, right? They don't have the language anymore, etc. Right? I've been coming across now more and more Romani-Chal speakers, actually, who call themselves Kale, by the way, right? The internal name is Kale, who speak the language outside the UK. So in the UK, there was a very strong assimilation process going on, and most of the families completely lost the language. But I recently come across, for example, Kako Bob, right? Originally from Wales, and he speaks the complete language, right? I have a song I will try and play in my workshop in a couple of days from him, yeah, where he's sending me a song on Facebook with red wine and his guitar, right, and greeting in Romani-Chal, right? And it's just so beautiful to find out, right, that it is still alive. Yeah, it's not died, right? But more importantly, the Romani customary law, right, which I think binds everyone. I disagree with Yaron Matras, who says language is the #1 characteristics of Romani speakers. No, I think it's the Romani customary law, because that's what all the Romani speakers, that's why all Romani speakers are perceived as gypsies in the outsider world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The question that I would like to raise now is about invisibility or visibility of interpreters or translators. What do you think about that? Yeah, if you are invisible.
Actually, no one is invisible. When you get the job to translate something, the person who gives you the work, although that he will not write your name as a translator, he knows your capacity, knowledge, qualities. So among the organizations which are looking for translators, they know you. And this is why you are invisible. You are invisible for the reader, but even if you are taking a document written by Council of Europe, and the document usually is a kind of policy paper, they never write the policy paper was written by John Smith. You don't know who wrote the policy paper, but actually the people in the Council of Europe know who is the author of the that text. So I would say that every translator, if you give one and the same text to 3 translators, they will translate it in 3 different ways. You will have on the end 3 different texts based on the background, educational background, intellectual capacity, knowledge of dialects, knowledge of languages, and on the end, learned strategies to make the translation. So the people can, especially those who are offering you the work, they easily can recognize, oh, this is the style of John, this is the style of Peter, how the translation is made. So
the issue of visibility or invisibility of interpreters, I don't think that exists. Not at all, absolutely. Me and Juicy and other colleagues, Yasharo, whatsoever, of course, there is a difference in the quality, how Orhan, how Juicy is doing. But before of everything, we are getting contract. And with that contract, if you would read, you are responsible how you are translating. And this responsibility is related because those who follow us, how we are doing job ad hoc, they look at the Roma over there and they know who understand what, how many Roma understand. For example, if you have at the conference 50 Roma, and if Orhan is translating, if there is, for example, again, 30 Roma don't understand Orhan, so Orhan is bad interpreter. But if Orhan translates and there is 40 people who understand and like him, so this is good. And conference by conference, experiences are answering this situation. And we forgot, when I say we, that means who loves Romani language and we work in Romani, we forgot to go to fields. This isolation is day by day, and especially the role of the technologies today. Technologies are one of the most very dangerous obstacle that the community which is in isolation, they have no idea, forgetting language and so on and so on. But we are the one who have to wake up the situation, working with Concordia or however, we have to propose not to give up, less and less of a negative competition among interpreters who are working today. We should have a place where we can really sit down and work on that. And also in any other language, you have 3 people who will translate, it will be 3 versions. Let me tell you that Albanians in Albania, 70 years ago, they did not have the standard language. So 70 years, there were 2 much more known dialects, Gag and Tuscany. They had a political fight, who will, and for me, the standard language, I am recalling that the people who are linguists, they really have to sit down and to work.
That's yes, but what I try to say is I understand there are political decisions which have been to be taken, you know, with the Roma, with each other, but in order to give more visibility to Romani or native like Romani speaking translator, would it help? You may not like the idea, but would it help to have a university degree, like from University of Concordia? Okay, you have a training as a translator with a specialization in Romanesque, because any kind of business is going to look at the skills that you have and, of course, the experience, because people hire you with the experience you have. A degree is just the first step, but you may not like it in the sense that having a university degree, it means that the Roman have to fit in a mold, which perhaps you don't want. That's my question. So.
I was thinking in another way. This is not visibility or invisibility of translator or interpreter. It is not right now about training. Actually, each translator and interpreter should be trained very well, and we spoke about that. But in my view, in translation studies view, invisibility is very often a situation of Romani translator, because this is not just the matter about reports, high institutional reports, because they nowhere write the names of the other authors, example, or maybe, yes, but there is no name of Romani translator. Why is that? Then you have your name, translator of the document, of the report. You have several books, literature, which is translated in Romani, but there is no written translation did this and this person. I think this is very important, because in that way, responsibility of translator would be much higher, you know, and he will really pay attention to translation and use all translational tools like grammar books, like dictionaries, like use the help from consultants to get really quality translation. The other things, what I think in the case of interpretation, as I told, this is not my field, but I often think about interpretation when I'm in a conference room. Sometimes I got hit like in my head when I'm listening to interpreter, because his or her voice is bothering me and it is giving me headache, believe me. It means that the color of voice to me has a really important role in interpreting. Not just because some people are sympathetic to me, but it is about color of voice. Then this person has to have really good diction, pronunciation. He has to train the voice, like we did that for radio programs. We couldn't go on microphone and talk for radio and for television, because I'm also my first occupation is journalist, editor for radio program Laču Dživero Male. Navem se ste taj bahtali, mislim ka te avilim Lačev pegova programu. Taj pala and for television program Malavipe, and then you have to study how to breathe. You know, this is exactly what people in the radio are doing, in television. As interpreter, you have to train your voice, pronunciation, the color, the way, how are you talking? You know, this is, to me, very important. And at least those who is calling you to do a work at the conference, they should say today's interpreter today is this in this person. We thank you very much for your service. You know, this is very important and professional, because people know. I told you, really, I got sick many times by listening interpreters, woman or man, it doesn't matter, but I just felt like hit in my head, like, really. This is about invisibility and visibility. It has to be known, because responsibility is much higher.
Thank you very much.
And you said electrogodi by Marcel Cortier. We have also one word in dictionary by Rade Uhlik in Gurbeti dictionary. Sastrunici rikli. Janesu sigova.
That's the aeroplane, no?
Of course.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
is
that's
like
international
Indian
as well.
language.
Yeah, that's international.
Baro shoro, like.
I think Kadina is making really, really important points here, right? Like the tone of the voice, yeah? I remember when I did my first conference interpretation in Strasbourg, well, actually, first I was there as a participant, and I was listening to the Romani-Translation, I was listening to the English and French booth, the Spanish booth, and there were differences, right? So, for example, the Spanish interpreters would put more emotions into the way they translate. So you would see the Spanish female sat in the booth, and she was also standing up and, you know, doing this with her hands, right, when she was translating. So, and then I saw the French, yeah, who were just sat there and very delicately, as if they were not even translating, right? You could hardly see their mouth move, right? And I saw the huge differences. And then I was also very lucky, because the director of the School of Interpreters in Strasbourg was there very often. Rui, he was called, and also another old teacher there, Remy, who is originally Indian, and they were telling me about, like, look, Juice, man, you got the voice for interpretation. You got that tone in your sound. Do you mind if we just teach you a bit and tell you what things you should do and avoid doing? And I was like, yeah, cool, of course, yeah. So they taught me, you know, all the technical things and also what things I should say or not say, or when there is a word that doesn't come to my mind, how I can tackle that situation. Like, one golden rule is never remain silent, right? When there is a word being spoken. It just happened to me once that we had Todorov, who is the chief judge of the International Traditional Romani Court, right? He lives in Switzerland and Germany now. So he was invited. There was a cultural conference. The evergreen question, are we Roma, Gypsy, or travelers? Right? That was the theme of the conference. And they invited the chief judge. So there he was, Todorov sat there. But the way he translated was because he was very cautious of interpretation as well. He understood that he speaks Romani, but he didn't know what guys will translate him in the booth. Right? And he wasn't happy about Romani-Translation himself before, because he didn't understand the dialects that were translated in the headphones. So he wanted to make sure that he's not getting misinterpreted. He put the headphones on while talking, switching to English, right? And it was my turn to take him. So I was translating him. And then there was a point where he spoke about Jesus and the nails in Jesus's hands. And then when he said the word karfin in Romani, right? And I was kind of, you know, with the speed. When I translate, I try to take the speed of the speaker, and I try to finish 1 or 2 seconds after they finish as well. And I try and say everything they say. But sometimes when you don't know a word, that will not be to your benefit, right? That technique. So I was like, karfin, is that nail or snail? Right, in English. I was so confused suddenly, because I knew that he was a big guy. To me, he was a big guy, because he comes from the community that I also come from. And I need to be very cautious, because I'm translating him. So my reputation can be ruined if this guy tells others, hey, Juice doesn't know how to translate, actually, right? And the guy should hire him. You got to be dangerous. He's a dangerous guy. You got to be careful with him. I was really scared of that risk. And then I was like, oh my God, is it nail or snail? And I stopped. And then he stopped as well, right? And then he said, so more, ci ne soye carfin pe English? And looked up at the booth and he asked me, hey man, you don't know what nail is in English, right? And I don't know who was sat next to me. I think it was Marcel, and he told me, nail. I'm like, oh shoot, man. Yeah, and I said nail. So I remember that for good, that story. But yeah, there are. I agree with Hadina using this example. The lack of interpretation for Romani interpreters makes us seem like the gypsy interpreters, right? Who, like with our stew, we put more spice in it, right? You know, when you drink differently. When you dance in gypsy, you dance differently, right? You know, and yeah, unfortunately, interpretation got stuck on that amateur level there. But I'm thinking the young people growing up now, and this is why I've been trying to encourage today the young people to speak up. They get it. They get it, right? They know it because they're getting educated and they understand this already. And this is why I think it is extremely crucial to have Romani interpretation course. Really, it doesn't exist anywhere in the world. Just think about it. And one thing which I don't think anybody mentioned today is, to me, the real benefit of Romani translation and interpretation is Romani engagement, Romani community engagement, right? If you think about it, yeah, if you've got the Romani speakers at the conference and they cannot say what they really want to say, right? And when I translate, people act like there is no interpreter. And I'm thinking, that's what a good interpreter is like. You're like a machine, right? But that's also dangerous because then your brain doesn't stop, right? After a hard day's work. Yeah, that's why interpreters have very strict rules of not doing more than 20 minutes, right? And you have to swap one another. Actually, at very high level conferences, they only do 5 minutes because you need to keep the quality of interpretation very fresh and very precise, right? But your mind, if you really heavily think about it, cannot focus longer than that, unless you get into situations like I did, where you have to do one conference for 12 days all on your own. Yeah, and they put me in that situation many, many times, like the International Romani Union Congress in 2000, the biggest ever Romani Congress I've ever seen. Have you guys been there? In Václavské náměstí in Prague, right? Thomas Acton was there as well, I remember. He's going to join us in a couple of days too. And then once the organizers felt really pity for me, they thought, oh, this poor kid, man. We're not paying him too well, and he's doing all this job on his own from 9 a.m. to 2 a.m. every single day. No kidding. Yeah, hundreds of people having lots of discussions, debates, and arguments as well. So a guy sat next to me trying to take up the speed, and after 5 minutes, he decided to get up and leave. You know, it's very, very hard to do this, especially with different kinds of dialects, really. But at the end of the day, if you do it many, many times, by experience, you can learn the dialects, right? And you can have experience understanding and translating into these dialects. But it's so challenging to date. Even though I've been doing this so many times in my life, it is always a challenge, right? I can never say, oh, I got it now, I know it. It is because we don't have dialects. That's why it always remains a challenge. It is because our language has never been standardized. It is because our dialects have never been described, right? And that's why if somebody tells you, I understand everything, no, don't worry, just give the job to me, then you know they're lying.
Okay. But in case of interpretation, I think you are in advantage because actually, you know, there is no possibility to follow up at the same time source and target language. Actually, the speaker who is speaking at the conference, at the same time listening to him, and the interpreter. How can we know that the quality of interpretation is adequate? Then I was thinking, but there is no Love, Janepala research, and I was thinking to record source language of the speaker and to record the translator, interpreter in Romani, and then to see how they match. how they interpreted that. That would be really good, like a very, very good investigation.
Well, yes, you see, in Canada, to understand what's going on in politics, you have to follow the news in French and in English. If you don't do that, you don't understand well what's going on. And I like the idea of actually, I like, and I'm used now to do that, to listen a language fully. And then I take the other channel. It could be Romanes. Well, Romanes and the other channel, English, you see? I find it so difficult to follow a translation. And then there is something else I wanted to ask you, although you didn't answer. Well, I had the feeling that a university degree will help. But when you say, well, it hits me so often to see how translation are so poorly done, then many people seem to be motivated to translate. And it seems to me that native speaker or not native speaker, you could say, okay, I don't think you made a good translation, but you said it, a very collaborative way. And I suggest you to take a training to improve and to keep this way going. And like that, there is no fight. There are so many, there is such a need for translation, even for someone like I. My Romanes is very simple. I would like to translate some Paramici I collect, and I cannot find, all this time in Canada, I could not find really an expertise to do that. Because at Canadian University, they say, okay, we have to trust her. And that's not good. But with collaboration, there's such a lack. That's the way to go, first of all, I think. Anyway, I'm sorry, because no.
I was thinking to ask Orhan, you are interpreting for so long time. Did you have a chance to listen to the other interpreter, Romani interpreter, at the conferences? What was your experience about that?
Unfortunately, we never had this kind of a critical point that I can say to my colleague, the way how to translate voice and so on, all these points, because I did not succeed to challenge an institution to organize the training. It is not my goal. But when I'm listening to other my colleagues, it is very interesting to see how they think and how they translate. We are still in a kind of a position of a beautiful creativeness of translation, to make it really good. I think now I am in a position that I should organize some people and make an initiative very clear. From this kind of discussion, we have to come out directly to talk to universities, not only Concordia. There are some other universities and institutions who are very much interested to have a quality interpreters, like Jussi said. Those people in Strasbourg, there is special school, and so it is a time, and there is no obstacle, and I don't see difficulty. There are very many Romani girls and boys who would love to be interpreters.
Of course, when I participate in international conferences, although that I don't use the Romani-Translation, sometimes I switch on the channel to listen how the colleagues, the friends are translating, and the most important thing for me is the quality of the Romani which they use for translation, for interpreting actually in this case. And of course, there are good and bad interpreters. It's known. And when you hear someone who is using the language in the most rich way, you feel proud. You say, wow, this is, wow, how he did it, yeah. But when you hear something like the guys, Akavasi akava okovasi okova, Janen, akavasi akava okovasi okova, I say, fuck, what I'm doing here, you know, so I'm sorry. Did I say something wrong? No, of course not. I'm so sleepy that this is why I don't speak like that. So, and the good interpreter could make you to feel happy and proud that you are Roma and you have such a rich and good language. And a bad interpreter could make you to feel ashamed that you are a speaker of Romani. And I had this kind of experiences in Council of Europe, when the Council of Europe is inviting people like, I don't want to say any bad words, but you know, almost illiterate Roma just because they pretend to be, you know, speakers of Romani, which means that they are immediately translators, interpreters. And then I say, well, what I'm doing here, gee, let's go home. So why I did say that? Because the quality of the language sometimes, I mean, the non-Roma will not understand how good or how bad is doing the work the Roma interpreter, yeah. But we, the Roma among us, we know that. And you are absolutely right that we never had this critical way of looking of this work, because you are not doing just the work to get some money. You are also doing the work in order to keep the language, to enrich the language, and to show the beauty of the language on the end. And for me, when I'm doing very rarely interpreting, the most challenging thing is the ability to use, to make this acrobatic jumpings to interpret the most difficult and non-usual speech and to present it in the most beautiful way. Yeah, or not only political speeches. I remember we were in India. You were there with Nicolae Gheorghe, yeah? And Liliana Kovacheva was organizing this meeting there. And there was a guy, Dayananda Surani Dayanand, yeah. And we went to Rishikesh. And Rishikesh is a very holy place in India, in northern India. Do you know that place? No? No comment? And there was this something like 85 years old guy, and all the students were from all over the world, all of them dressed in white, and they received us, something like 30 Roma activists from Europe. And Nicolae Gheorghe told me, Christo, make the translation now. I said, how? I mean, the guy is going to use this kind of, you know, very specific spiritual terminology. And then it was such a great pleasure to hear. He was speaking about the creation of the world, how the God created the world and all those things. And in most of the cases, this kind of a lexicon doesn't exist in Romani, and then you have to use your knowledge from one dialect to another dialect to a third dialect. And when I finished with it was something like 30 minutes. When I finished that interpreting, it was simultaneous, and it was extremely stressful situation. I was not prepared at all. Then Nicolae Gheorghe came to me, and Nicolae Gheorghe was, God bless him, Odel Tertiles. He was a very good Roma activist, intellectual, very well known in Europe. And he told me, you know what? I heard Rajko Đurić making this kind of good interpreting into Romani, from English into Romani, and now I hear you doing this kind of interpreting. I said to him, I was not prepared, I don't know what I did, but I tried to do my best to use my knowledge from all the dialects to make this comprehensive. And there were people from Albania, from Serbia, from Macedonia, from all different dialects. And to think about this, that everyone who is sitting there should understand your Romani, it was a very hard work. So yeah, I think that this is a good moment when we should stop this session. I made myself so proud to you that I succeeded with translating and interpreting Swami Dayananda's speech in Rishikesh. And thank you very much for your attention and participation in this session. And I wish you a very nice evening. Thank you. Nice to meet you.